Live to Montreal now, NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh is speaking to reporters about the cost of food ahead of the Thanksgiving weekend.
This is because they cannot buy the groceries they need. I've spoken with friends, and they had told me that their concern is the cost of groceries, and they're prioritizing cost over quality or nutrition of the food. And that's a big difference. We find ourselves in a time where people are using food banks more than ever in a country as wealthy as ours. So that is a real problem. And what was the Liberal government's response? They asked the very same CEOs who have created the problem to nicely stabilize prices. That's a ridiculous approach. There has been a lack of action for 2 years. And now their big action, as Alexander said, is to look at flyers as if we didn't have them before. So it's really a ridiculous approach. That's because we cannot believe those very same CEOs who took advantage of the situation to make record profits. We cannot trust them to solve the problem themselves. This is why we're proposing our solution. Our solution is to strengthen the Competition Bureau's authority to force grocery stores to reduce and stabilize their prices and to stop practices that they are using that allows them to continue to raise prices without penalty. We're going to protect consumers, and we're going to put an end to price-fixing practices. We need to remember that the CEOs of these large grocers engaged in price-fixing of bread prices a few years ago. So they intentionally raised prices on bread, and the Liberal government's approach is to nicely ask them to stabilize prices. So this Prime Minister does not understand the reality that people live in and does not understand that here in the Prime Minister's very writing. Our plan is to force those large grocers and their CEOs, because of their greed, are jacking up grocery prices. Our plan is to say, no, that has to end. We have to force them to bring prices down by giving more authorities to put an end to price-fixing practices. This is what we're proposing. What does this mean for families? This means that instead of being afraid every time you go to the grocery store, instead of being afraid, will I be able to buy the groceries that I need to feed my family? Instead of having that fear, those families can worry about, how am I going to incorporate that into my recipes? How am I going to prepare that food, rather than will I be able to buy that food? No one should have that fear. We can have a situation where people can buy the groceries that they need for their families. They can have celebrations together with their families, such as Thanksgiving. If the government takes our approach, we would have a completely different situation. But we will continue to put pressure on the government, and we will continue to pressure those large grocers and the government to do what they have to do. We are in a situation right now where for 21 months, the cost of food has outpaced general inflation. That means 2 years almost that Canadians, people here in Quebec and across the country, have been struggling with the cost of their food. It means families that earn good salaries are saying we're more worried about the cost of our food than we are about the quality of food. It means sacrifice. Families are having to sacrifice not buying the food that is important for families, the food that's necessary to keep families healthy, and instead are worried about how much it costs. And what has been the approach of the Liberal government? For 2 years, nothing. And they only now started caring or acting like they care when they're down in the polls. And that's why I'm here today in the riding of Justin Trudeau in Papineau to send a clear message. Your plan
to ask CEOs nicely to reduce prices is ridiculous. These are the same CEOs that used inflation as cover to jack up their prices. They're not going to bring down their prices on their own. That's why we're putting forward a challenge. We've got a law that will protect consumers, strengthen the laws of the Competition Bureau, put an end to price fixing, put an end to price gouging, and really give people a shot so that this Thanksgiving, if we had put in place our law, what we want to see is that people can go and focus on making sure they're following their recipe, not worried about if they can afford groceries. I want families to be able to focus on enjoying time with their loved ones, enjoying recipes that they've passed down from generation to generation, cooking food and enjoying that food together, laughing and having that fun that people should be able to have. You're allowed to, and you should be able to find time to come together and not worry that you can't afford the groceries. So that's what we're putting forward. That's why we're here in Papineau to put forward our plan, which is to force these companies to make prices more affordable, not to just ask them nicely. With that, je suis prêt pour vos questions. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Inaudible question.
Si on parle
Answer.
de crise du logement, on doit,
If we're talking about the housing crisis, first we need to highlight that it's a big problem. There are many different facets to that problem, and it's going to take many different solutions. So there is no just one solution that is going to solve that problem. But in general, the problem is that for a long time, for decades, liberal and conservative governments have effectively created a market that is excellent for wealthy investors, but a market that does not work for workers, families, young people, and our seniors. That's truly the problem. Therefore, in order to solve that problem, we need many different forms of action. I agree that there is a problem with the fact that there are several many apartments that are used by companies such as Airbnb, which does in fact reduce opportunities for families themselves to get a long-term apartment. That's one problem. But even bigger than that is the fact that the federal government has not taken a clear and active role to build affordable housing. When Justin Trudeau was asked about this, he said that it was not federal jurisdiction. That's an approach of saying that it's not my responsibility. It's other parties or other levels of government that need to solve that problem. That approach is playing the blame game. It's not something that's going to solve the problem. My approach is that we need to take this crisis seriously and that we need to use the authority, lands, and resources of the federal government to work together with the provinces to quickly build affordable housing for families. Answer. Absolutely. Once again, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is trying to find someone to blame rather than doing the work that is required. Right now, we have a Conservative leader who's doing the same thing. He's seeking to blame municipalities and municipal governments. My approach is that we need to work together, no doubt. The federal government has a big role to play in that in order to help resolve this crisis. That means using federal lands, resources, and power to work together with the provinces and municipalities to build affordable housing. This includes nonprofit housing, co-op housing, and really take this crisis seriously.